Hello and welcome. This is Business Edge right here on News Central. I'm Solulakwe Adelere Balogun. We'll get into the headlines that we have for you in just a bit, but let's take a quick look at the stock markets, both how they're performing on the continent and outside. We'll be right back. And on this edition of the show, our conversation will center on the evolution of African economies. I have a guest in the studio with me, a financial expert and analyst who's going to go through this. And of course, as we look at how African countries can grow their economies and what could be holding them back. Again, this is Business Edge. Welcome to the show. Now, with over 1/3 of African countries posting 6% or higher growth rates and another 40% growing between 4% to 6% per year, international business observers have named the continent the future economic growth engine of the world. But what are the realities on ground? How accurate are these projections, and what is the measuring benchmark for them? With me to discuss the intricacies of the biggest economic arguments of the day, looking also at inequality, is Economist per excellence and the CEO of global analytics consulting, Tope Fasua. And in his third book, The Race for Capital, he tackles the topic of inequality with an approach to explore developmental solutions. Tope, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's look at this. The evolution of African economies basically is saying that African economies have had a way of evolving, of moving from maybe point A to point C, then further down the alphabet, if we use that particular line of thinking. But in terms of a general outlook on the growth of African economies versus what Africans are feeling in these countries, do we really see the projections and this Africa is the next big thing, Africa is rising? Are we really seeing that truly reflected in the lives of Africans?
Well, no, because again, African countries, some of them have some of the highest rates of inequality. And so if you are measuring growth, you're looking at just the GDP, and sometimes those figures don't make a lot of sense. Certainly not to the common man, but even among economic circles, the idea of GDP has been criticized for several reasons. For one, it could be skewed. For example, if a certain sector grows in the economy, let's say the oil sector grows in Nigeria, maybe the price of crude oil went up, you'll see growth in GDP, but it doesn't mean that the other sectors of the economy has grown. And so it's just a metric, just a convenient figure. Simon Kuznets, who was the originator of GDP, around 1935, 1938, did say, as he was working on the idea, that this should not be used as a silver bullet because there's so many things that GDP doesn't capture. So that's why you won't see, such, effect in the lives of African people. Aside from that, I would also dare say that that African economies aren't growing at the rate they should be growing. If you went back and checked maybe an economy like China, it grew at 18% at some point. Recently, the Chinese economy growth slowed down to about 6%. And of course, it was like, the world is coming to an end. And even I was reading the Economist today too, they were like saying, man, this is a serious slowdown in Chinese economy. This is catastrophic. Now we're talking about a $14 trillion economy growing at 6%, all right, which is about 800 million dollars is being added to that economy every year, and you're complaining about it being too slow. So compared to, let's say, even the Nigerian economy, $400 billion, and if we grow at 6%, someone thinks it's a great achievement. Yeah. So it seems like ab initio, there's this idea that African economies are underperformers, and they should continue to be underperformers. If they grow at 5%, 6%, that's great.
That's success for them. But if others grow at that, it's not.
If they grow at 2%, 3%, that's acceptable. What we should be saying is that it is unacceptable for us to grow at 3%. I also did quite a bit of research during the election, especially, and I found out that if you Googled US GDP growth, for example, and you took marks on Trading Economics, that's a website that takes some of those things. If you took marks, meaning to show you for as far back as the record has been kept, you'll see that the US economy grew at about 15%, 10, 12%, sometimes in the 60s, 70s. Equally, the UK economy grew at 12%, 10%. Now, these economies have plateaued. Today, at least, but even though they've plateaued and they are matured economies, the US economy is still growing at about 4% to 4.2%. I mean, that's remarkable. Most economies in Europe are growing around 2%. Nigerian economy is projected to grow at 3% this year. We closed at about 2% last year. And that's seen as an achievement. So first of all, the growth rate we're seeing in most parts of Africa is below the growth rate is below the combination of the growth rate of their population and their inflation put together. That's negative growth. I really
wanted you to mention the population, because if we're looking at Nigeria as an example, our population growth rate, our birth rate compared to what our GDP growth rate is, it's absolutely abysmal. There's no way we're meeting up to the needs of the generations that are coming after us. But you say that using GDP is just not the right measure. Then what would be a true and accurate measure of how our economies are growing?
Well, other people have worked on different matrices in the past, some that are a bit more involving. For example, if you look at the HDI, Human Development Index, I think it was developed by Amartya Sen, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, I think so, a Pakistani economist. And so what he tried to do is to say, look, let's forget this huge GDP number that we always talk about. How does it dovetail into the lives of people? So in order for you to get the HDI, you'll be looking at, okay, how many children are going into school? What's the access of people to health, for example? What's the state of the environment? How long are people living? Longevity and all of that. What kind of the average good life are they having? Now, that tells you that whatever the GDP is, it must dovetail into the lives of the people. You want to see the GDP reflected in infrastructure. You want to see a government that's responsible to the people, that is not only caring about the elites and all of that stuff. So that was what they did with the HDI. Other people have different things. In fact, I read a while ago, Gordon Brown was talking about the need to move away from GDP to look at some sort of indexes that measure the good life for the people of even Europe. So if they are thinking about this, I would wager that, look, it's African countries that actually should be thinking about that, because this is where you have some of the highest incidences of crass poverty, unemployment, and all of those
undereducation, underemployment.
Absolutely. 13.5 million children on the streets in Nigeria. I can't stop talking about it because I know that. I see that it is, it is the mortgaging of this country. The life of this country has been mortgaged several times over. I don't know how you're going to solve that problem.
Because they will grow up and they will demand resources.
Yes, exactly. No, again, let me now let you know the paradox of it is, as I was saying somewhere else over the weekend, that is our own capital. That is our capital wasting away.
And we have not invested in that.
Exactly. You're not building that capital. You're letting it waste away, and you're going around the world borrowing money from here to there, and mortgaging the future again. So it's a kind of double, triple jeopardy in the life of this country. Okay,
so let's look more now in terms of the economies. And we've been seeing a lot of good projections, and I'll still sort of dovetail back into my original question. We keep hearing the Africa is rising narrative. 2018, even 2019, even now 2020 and beyond, we're hearing that sub-Saharan Africa is going to be home to 5, 6 of the fastest growing economies around the world. You're smiling, I have not finished the question. That they're going to be home to several of the world's fastest growing economies, and this is according to the International International Monetary Fund. Now, growth figures in the region will be led by Ethiopia, Rwanda, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Benin, Kenya, Uganda, Burkina Faso as well, who will remain in the top 10. Tanzania joined in 2019, replacing Guinea. And so you had a number of these, and these are things that we see politicians a lot of times sort of use as, this is what we're doing a great job. You see that you're fastest growing economy. But what does that really actually mean when you're getting someone like the International Monetary Fund, a Bretton Woods institution, telling you that you are a fastest growing economy? What does that translate to?
Yeah, unfortunately, politicians are lazy. The kind of politicians we have in most of Africa, they are lazy. We haven't seen many of them who are actually thinking outside the box to say that, look, you know, we don't have to wait for the imprimatur, the encouragement, backslapping coming from maybe a Bretton Woods institution before we move on. Unfortunately, we're just sinking deeper and deeper. Most of them have their economies being run by people who have been immersed in the same Bretton Woods economics, Washington consensus, which hasn't taken us anywhere out of the woods since we started. In getting independence. We've only sunk deeper and deeper. In fact, the little blip we had post-independence has disappeared. And so we're just basically, if the IMF or the World Bank will tell us we're doing a great job, we just go to town and say we're doing a great job. I had this discussion, unfortunately, with one of the ex-World Bank people, Obieze Kwesili, over the campaigns. And when she said, I said, look, Nigerians should be running at double digits. I believe that we should be targeting 15% growth of our economy. If they could do it in China, in the USA, in Europe, in most part of Europe and all of that, and most part of Southeast Asia, why not we? And she said, well, in a rather condescending manner, but she said, if we could get 6 to 8%, then we're okay. That's great. No, it's not great. So first of all, now if you look at some of those figures we are seeing here, like Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, some of those countries are growing at 8%. It's a shame on Nigeria. Nigeria has tremendous potential. Look, the energy of our people alone is something to work with. But we're shortening most of those energies. For one, the fact that the Nigeria's economy is kind of limited to Lagos, Kano, Port Harcourt, some part of Abuja, a little bit of a few pockets. Most of the state capitals are run only when the state governors are around. Everybody goes. If you're not connected to the government house, nothing. So what has happened to the rest of the economy? That's why I think that the kind of investment we need is those investments that will go back and wake up the rural areas. I think, and there are many ways of doing that also, even to the extent that, for example, the issue of security, you find out that most people don't go to their villages anymore. People don't want to drive, who have a bit of money, don't want to drive by road to wherever they're going. Everybody wants to fly. We're leaving all those economies on the ground. We're leaving them, to regress back into more poverty and so on. So there are many ways. Even I've also advocated in the past that a lot of people pushing files in all of these local governments, right? In all of these secretariats, state secretariats, federal secretariats, they should be sent back to the villages, right? There's work to do. See, do you know that even mere mobilization officers, people who go to each village every month to tell them about what government is doing, or we're coming, okay, government is out, this is how you should be, this is the kind of thing, some sort of things, driving unity, driving togetherness. If you sent those kind of people to each village every day, consistently, young people, you would have impact, even if it's the food they're going to buy from that mama put in the village. They're adding something back to the village.
The money goes back into the economy. But the way they're running
the economy, everybody is there in the federal secretariat or in the state secretariat, pushing files, looking for how to benefit from whatever deals are going on and so on. So the economy will not grow. So first of all, shame on Nigeria that we're thinking of 2%, 3% when some of these African economies are running at 8%. But also remember that some of them, like Rwanda, is maybe a $2.5 billion economy. So,
and I want to talk about another economy that we really cannot have this conversation about the African outlook without mentioning them, and that's South Africa. They're the most industrialized economy on the continent, a 29% unemployment rate right now. Many people are saying that President Cyril Ramaphosa he's just pushing which way he can to get them out of the ESCOM situation, the SAA situation. A number of state utilities are just basically places where money has sunk into. So you have an outlook for Nigeria that's not as good as it should be. You have an outlook for South Africa that literally has them on the cusp of recession. These are the biggest economies, and much of the driving force of the continent comes from them. What do we do about South Africa?
Well, South Africa, Well, I wish that Africa luck, but I'm a little bit more focused on what do we do about Nigeria.
Yeah, but it's a relationship.
I personally believe that the South African economy is still larger than the Nigerian economy.
After the rebasing and all that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we did all that rebasing in order to feel big with ourselves. I mean, come think of it. Maybe you've been to South Africa before, but I've seen a few of the pictures of Cape Town, of Johannesburg. I know the kind of products they make and all of that. And so there's what they call economic complexity, which is the knowledge quotient of the goods and services, the knowledge that come out of that economy. So if BMW has been producing in South Africa for as long as we can remember, if MTN came from South Africa, if DSTV came from South Africa into Nigeria, some of this highly intelligent, technology-based companies and so on. If their banks are a lot larger than our banks still, maybe you're talking about APSA and all of those people, then I think, and of course, if they have such huge tourism footfall that Nigeria could only dream about, if we still go there, even in terms of getting good health for our people and all of that, then I think that South Africa's economy is larger than this country. It's not about how many numbers of people you have. Yeah. About 60 million people live in South Africa. Their budget alone is 6 times our budget every year. That's a disgrace. And the level of transparency you see around their public finance is something we need to copy from, because if you Google South Africa's budget 2020, right now, 2020, 2022, they did the 3-year budget and so on. You see the PDF document. If you Google Johannesburg budget, the city of Johannesburg budget right now for this year, you see the PDF of the document. In Nigeria, you have to do a little bit more searching before you're able to piece together. Maybe, of course, the federal government seems to be okay, but the states, you don't get anything. Even Lagos State tried to do something in the time of Fashola, but I think they've dumped that idea. So that's what tells you how an economy and where it's going. So unfortunately, Ramaphosa and before him Zuma and all of those people, made them to start alleging that, when black people run the economy, they're going to run it underground. Unfortunately, you know what I'm saying? But I wish them luck, so if they could fix ESCOM and some of the other things that are holding them down. One of the things I can also see, which is very significant, is that the South African people, of course, the blacks are the most disadvantaged there, but they don't treat their children the way we treat our children here. You won't see a lot of children on the streets begging with bowls in South Africa. And that tells me something about the future of South Africa and the future of Nigeria.
Okay, Tope, I have to call a pause right now. All right, we'll go on a quick timeout. When we come back, we'll get into a bit of Tope's book, The Race for Capital, and talk about how inequality on the continent is affecting our economic prospects. Do stay with us. You're still watching Business Edge, and I still have Economist Tope Fasua with me. We'll be wrapping up the conversation in just a bit, but I want to talk about your third book, which was The Race for Capital, and you really made an interesting case in terms of how inequality is affecting the economic prospects of the continent. How do we change that, and where do you see this inequality really digging deep and affecting us the most?
Well, it's been a while since I wrote that book. I think it was 2013 or 2012, thereabout. And I wrote it on the backdrop of Thomas Piketty's book, Capital in the 21st Century. So the big argument is, okay, fine, this capitalism thing, where is it taking everybody to? This race for money, so who's winning this race? Yeah. If they were winning the race, what's the point of winning the race? Is there going to be a point at which, even people will have to get what they call universal basic income, where it doesn't make much sense for you to start hustling? Because number one, machines are taking the job from everybody, artificial intelligence, IoT and all of that, is coming in and going for the jugular. And you can see the way banks are laying off people now in the droves. And this morning, I saw an advert by, I think, one of the big banks. It was all about data analytics people, data this, data that. And so they are wasting all the people that are interfacing with customers. They're thinking about people who will interface with computers so that computers can serve the people. That's the kind of, however, they're never going to be able to take on as many people as that. So now, unfortunately, since that time also, Nigeria actually hit the radar last year to become the country with the highest levels of inequality in the world, according to the Oxfam report that came out. So and now what this says is that whatever thing we're celebrating here, we're not quite doing things right. We don't know what we're doing, because we may be talking about growth figures, we'll be talking about successes of entrepreneurs and so on, but we seem to be leaving a larger proportion of the problem. in terms of, you know, the fact that a lot of people are falling even way below the poverty line, and that inequality is growing. And for as long as you have that inequality in the system, you know, things are never going to quite balance. So it's something that our governments, they really need to think about.
Yeah.
We need to know see, we need to be, it's a very big issue, right? But the level of insight you need to be able to project into the future and see where some of these things are going and make deliberate and hard decisions that will provide for those people who are vulnerable amongst us. Because the economy has been run so far with the idea that, look, if you can't make it on your own, you drop off. But we're saying that not all of us will be as strong as everybody else. You know, some people are going to be vulnerable. Some people cannot think fast. Some people cannot study some of those very difficult things. You have to make provision for them so long as your country remains a country, except you have ideas about how you want to end it all. But if you're not ending it all, you have to make provisions for those people. Even in the developed countries, they have those safety nets as well. They provide, and in fact, the country is only seen to be strong to the level that it makes provision for its most vulnerable people.
Okay, so Tope, this is my last question because we have absolutely run out of time, but we can't have a conversation about African economies projecting and moving forward if we don't talk about corruption, if we don't talk about capital flights and how much money actually leaves the continent every single year, much more than what comes in according to all available statistics. And we have to have that conversation, even as the Corruption Perception Index has looked at what's happening with governments and economies in sub-Saharan Africa. In one sentence, what do you really think we can do in terms of getting a handle on corruption across board? One sentence. Technology. Remove more people from the conversation.
Unfortunately, that's what's going to solve the problem in that area. Take people out of it, put systems that don't discriminate, you know, check every follow the money, you know, check every, have some sort of exception report that flag some of these transactions, and in no time, and we're doing that, I can see, we must say, because all of these things about e-payment, about BVN is linked. Is the beginning. You know, the biggest challenge is that the guys who are running, one word, the guys who are running the system know that if they actually effect it the way it should be effected, it'll blow back to them. So they slow down. We'll
leave it at that. It's a very fascinating conversation and just really getting to the crux of it. So much more we could talk about, but we do look forward to having Tope Fasua back with us. He is an economist. He's also an author of The Race for Capital, and he's the CEO of Global Analytics Consulting. Tope, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
All right, as we wrap things up, you know what we do, and that is NC4 to watch. Here are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. The Kenyan Central Bank cuts key lending rate to 8.25%, and the central bank in Kenya, after a monetary policy committee meeting, cut its benchmark lending rate to 8.25% from 8.50%, saying the economy is operating below potential and there is room for more accommodative monetary policy. Zimbabwe tax agency targets businesses to raise dollars as they have ordered businesses charging their customers in foreign currency to settle their tax obligations in foreign currency as the government aims to raise scarce dollars. How will this play out? Rwanda to host Global Summit on Malaria, NTDS. The country has announced that they've been selected to host the Global Summit on Prevention of Malaria and Neglected Tropical Diseases in 2020, and that's happening in June in the Rwandan capital city of Kigali. And finally, East Africa cost itself out of big share in global trade. Now, while Kenya and Tanzania have attempted to join global trade through production of goods in special economic zones, high labor costs have threatened to hamper their efforts. And this according to World Bank Group Chief Economist Penelope Goldberg. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget that we hope to see you on our website and, of course, following us on all of our social media platforms. Until next time, do stay profitable. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun.